Just recently, in 2011, the City Council in Evanston voted unanimously to pursue having wind energy in an offshore farm outside on Lake Michigan. The city decided they were going to partner with Northwestern University, and they've overcome significant hurdles in the past 2 years, including the cost of the project, getting permits to do it, but the most important thing they've overcome is public opinion in Evanston. In case you haven't heard about it, the wind farm is actually going to be 6 to 8 miles off of Lake Michigan, and it's going to provide enough energy for 30,000 households in Evanston. So that's a big undertaking. Secondly, if built, it would actually be the first wind farm in the United States, and it would also be the first wind farm in Lake Michigan. And what is most important, though, wind power, though, is a clean energy, and it's different than having the fossil fuels. So it would contribute to the energy kind of crisis that we have here in the U.S. As a lot of people who don't know anything about wind energy might not realize it, but beginning about 2000, wind energy increased about 150% in Europe. But here in the United States, it's only increased about 87% during that same time frame. And I think Americans are starting to realize perhaps there is an alternative to what we currently have now. And the state of Maine actually has come across a plan that they would like to develop as well, and that would provide enough energy for the whole state of Maine in the next 10 years. So you might ask yourself, why renewable energy? And more importantly, why all of a sudden has this become a popular topic? And fossil fuels today are not renewable. So when you're talking about fossil fuels, you have to realize that you're going to have to rely on finite resources that we currently have in order to expedite that resource out of the ground. But more importantly, it is going to be challenging to retrieve those at some point. And then when you contrast that with something else, renewable energy, here's an energy that can reproduce itself, such as solar energy or wind energy. So you're not expending something, you're actually producing something that can help in the future. What I found most important is I did my thesis on this topic, and in 2010 there was something that came about where 200 nations came together, and it was called the Kyoto Protocol. And they agreed that they were going to bring the greenhouse gas emissions back to what we had in 1990. And I think this is extremely important because almost every country ratified it or agreed to participate in this treaty except for the United States. The United States didn't feel like it had an energy policy at the time and didn't feel like they could come on board. But today what I'd like to do is just to have you kind of have an open mind and review two countries I'm going to talk about and kind of how they were successfully developing their own wind power over the past 10 to 12 years. And this is important because I think it can engage citizens in the local level, because perhaps you could say, this is something that maybe I could have a hand in my own community like Evanston did. The first country I'd like to talk about is Germany, because Germany announced just recently with Fukushima plant episode that happened, and I'm sure you probably saw that in the news, it was quite a catastrophe. They realized at that point that they were going to take a bold stand. And they made a point of deciding that they were no longer going to use atomic power. So they're within the next 13 years, they will not be using any nuclear power in Germany. And in hindsight, that might seem like, wow, how could a country make that decision? They must have had some kind of energy policy for this whole time frame. But that's really not the case. Germany actually came about their wind power in the 1970s. They had 2 universities in Germany, and they made a point of investing in those universities and said, perhaps, these wind turbines could be developed into larger wind turbines, that it could actually be used for energy. And once they came about a model, they opened it up to everybody in Germany, and they said, we're going to offer a feed-in tariff, and with this subsidy or economic stimulus, we hope that perhaps you might consider having a wind farm. And the group that took up this proposition was actually farmers in Germany. And today, in fact, 13 years later, most of the people who have made a living doing this are farmers. So it's not somebody who perhaps is an engineer or somebody had a lot of money. They offered a startup bonus, and these people continued on, and they've done very successfully. And Germany has made a policy after the Kyoto Protocol, and that is they'd like to see that by the year 2050, they'd like to have 100% of their energy given by renewable resources. So I mean, that in such a short time frame, that's a noble cause, in my opinion. The second country that in Europe that did things very differently, but also has really developed themselves in wind power is Sweden. Now, Sweden did not develop their wind power with Germany; it did it separately, and they had 2 or 3 companies in Sweden that approached the government, and they said, you know, this could be a proposition that could really put Sweden way far in advance of other countries. So they worked in local governments, and they said, you know, would it be possible to maybe have a wind farm here off the coast? And what happened is a lot of local citizens said, you know, I don't see aesthetically how I could look at that every day. So in some cities, wind power was passed, and a lot of areas in Sweden they still don't have wind turbines, but they left it up to the actual people in the community. So where they felt that wind power was a public good or something that anyone could be see as a resource, they allowed it to be determined aesthetically, because that's the principle kind of that they thought was more important. So Sweden today, though, has a goal, and they would like to see just 50% of their energy resources being developed through renewable energy resources like wind within 13 years. So that they've even come quicker along in having the renewable resources. So in conclusion today, I just would like to say that wind energy is kind of the fastest growing renewable resource that we have out there. And if you have to bring something on quickly, perhaps think about an economic support mechanism, you know, that's going to generate a big response from a large group of people. Governments can engage citizens. I've seen it happen in Evanston. I think we all get something every week on how this wind policy is going to affect us. And renewables will gain a foothold against conventional energy resources, and it will happen much quicker than you might expect. And the governments need to develop an energy target, because obviously our government doesn't have an energy target on the record now, but hopefully in the next few years that will happen. So thank you very much.